accept and then shopping, that we have moved on to some degree, I can't understand why they continue to think there's important for us to go back to the past when they themselves think that's perfectly fine. And we can distance ourselves from these things and use that as a justification to why we can now use different policies apart from what we are proposing. Right. But thank you. But then he said, look, we did it to Japan and we did it to Germany, therefore this must be a moral reason to why we can't do it to everyone else. First of all, the only reason why we were able to make these two countries pay reparations was out of a use of force. The fact that we won the war, and for no other good reason were we able to make them use reparations as well. No, thank you. Never mind that the Marshall Plan created a hell of a lot of problems that we currently see in the Middle East, because where the Jews ended up, and the kinds of attachment to these things, that isn't justification to why reparations in and of themselves are good. No, thank you. But back to the responsibility point, just because we're once able to do it because of fear of one particular war, doesn't mean that successive governments who have broken that chain of causality have a responsibility. No, thank you. What's more, they're proposing that every single one of us in this room now has a legal responsibility to slaves who were, unfortunately, who had unfortunate past no thanks in the past, right? And that seems to beg the question to why any kinds of legal rules or why any kinds of legal regulations currently put restrictions on how long a particular case can be put into place in the first phase. Because we understand, no thank you, that past a certain point, time and expiry requires us to move on. But second, does the policy really solve any of the problems today? No thanks. And this is where we say, and this is the whole point of debating this entire point, is to say that even if we did have a moral responsibility, the question we've been repeatedly asking is why reparations? And the brilliant response that Shafiq had to this point was, it does something, and because it helps them. Everything helps them. Anti-discrimination laws helps them. Payouts help them. Hell, progressive taxation helps them as well. That is not a justification for your particular policy of reparation. Before I say more, yes.
Your first speaker said that our model creates a negative perception that black people need help. You are saying that black people should be perceived as needing help. Are you okay with skin color identification?
First of all, I'm not quite sure how there's a contradiction, right? I'm perfectly happy to say that they should be identified by skin color because that's the bloody problem. And we're not denying that some of these policies have progressed, but that doesn't justify to why a policy, one, either morally ties us to these two things, or second, is good enough such that we should retain this particular policy. Do we make the right policies? We think a degree of sympathy needs to be maintained. And to that extent, you absolutely cannot tell sympathizers right now that they hold responsibility to things that they absolutely didn't do. It is much better to let them believe that they're doing this out of charity and the fact that we simply need to help people who are poorer than us, that retains the ability for us to create that lobbying pressure and ability to correct and create policies that might help them. But we also think that this shuts them up. Insofar as these individuals might feel aggrieved, we're happy to say that they should continue to feel aggrieved. If they do have these sentiments, then perhaps these things should continue. I am going very much against what Shafiq said because I believe that they should have a right to do these particular things. If that was the case, it does not tie into the ability for these governments to pay them back, right? We think these governments should do something, but they should have the ability to continue to agitate for these things on their own regard. Reparations shut them up in the same way that these slaves used to shut them up in the past. We hardly think that this is something that we need to do. The last point that we talked to you about in opposition was this. We need to move on, Mr. Chair. And as long as we retain the vestiges of the past and we tie them to the exact same medium that used to oppress them, we will never move on. They should be able to shape for a change, but it doesn't mean that the exact policy which is change happens with reparations because it brings so much of the past back to the future, and that is why we oppose.
Alright, and that be onward and conclude the cases by the opposition and the reply.
if you were to stand beside opposition, this is what you believe in. That slavery happened 200 years ago. The side proposition is unable to prove that in the causal chain of events that most of what happened because of the initial trigger of slavery. If you believe in side opposition, you say that the new problem that society faces today is race, and that yes, you may say that it may be related to the problems of the past, but at the end of the day, you'll still believe opposition's version that since it's a current day problem, the current day government has every responsibility to solve it. If you believe inside opposition, you'll say that society is better off moving forward in terms of like tackling its problems head on and saying that a person should get education, should be hired rather than being given a car just because you are able to demonstrate via your tribunal that he belongs to a particular lineage. If you stand beside opposition, this is what you believe, proposition, that's what you believe in. Is that we have already abandoned the primary responsibility of this debate, which is to identify responsibility, right? Like you are the only reason why the state or the nation is the person that you find responsibility and you chase after is because it's the only thing that lived through these 200 years out there. Never mind the fact that the nation and the state has moved on dramatically. Never mind the fact that political parties have changed their views on so many stands, and they have to pay at numerous occasions the price of like these policy reverses, but they were willing to do so because it was more important. Never mind the fact that political parties, yes, there is a difference between inheriting problems versus inheriting calculuses of solving those problems. It is true that perhaps like the black problem is because in a long chain of events due to slavery. But it is not true that the solution or the calculus to look at blacks is that they were victimized because they were once slaves. It is not true that the solution to repay them directly is to say that because they belong to a particular lineage, they now get a leg up out there. Because if you were to buy that kind of logic, many people who need help will not get help. For example, the poor whites. Many people, for example, the African Americans, some of them who did not suffer as much, will still be given the same kind of treatment. There is really no real fairness. But the worst thing is if you stand beside proposition is that problems can only be solved if we identify according to lineages. They said that, look, Brian said that we recognize certain race issues and that is bad. No, that is not true. It's saying that looking at the current demographic, that certain problems or certain social economic problems are more aligned to, like, for example, a particular race. That is very different, ladies and gentlemen, from the findings of a tribunal that tells you that maybe 200 years ago you came into this particular land and therefore your life never once got better. So what is this debate also about? This debate is also about how people respond to this and how do society move on forward. So for example, the Japanese comfort women, the reason why we are willing to say an apology is so much better than like giving the person money is because like Natalie's point about how a lot of these historical grievances are tied to the fact that I'm willing to buy your services, I'm willing to like absorb myself on moral responsibility so long as I'm able to pay a certain amount of money, i.e. dignity is less important than the amount of money that I'm willing to pay. For example, the black man who can't find a job under your system is going to be screwed because like what Shafiq said is that you no longer can say that I can't find a job because I'm black because you have already been paid for. No, the problem that you are black, the problem that some subliminal discrimination still exists, the fact that it's difficult to find a particular job still exists, and it's your policy that denies this group of people who get a job. But what is worse is that this black man will never be able to find dignity under your system because you said that it's bad enough thing that he goes to the government welfare services because appealing the fact that he is a black person. But now it's even worse, right? That he's able to try and like to blame his poverty to like an event that happened 200 years ago, and no one is going to take them seriously. What is going to be taken seriously is when society is able to say that the act of slavery was very screwed up. The fact that our governments were very slow in dealing with this problem is very screwed up. But our current government inherited both the advantages and disadvantages of the particular system, and we are going to solve problems as they are. Because these problems, when we solve, is the government fulfilling their responsibility towards these individuals.
Right, I have the government reply and conclude around, officer reply and conclude around the government reply.
We think it is naive for that side of the house to argue that slavery had no hand in modern racism just because somehow the racist sentiments have evolved. Because that was not the link that they had to break in our argumentation. You guys needed to argue to break down what was the genesis of any discrimination of the black community, who created that. Because even if racism has evolved through time, it doesn't mean your government didn't actively create the entire concept of racism in the first place by making them slaves. What was the analysis the opposition needed to take down but conveniently ignored? That the state created the very conditions that compelled them into the slave trade, and then created the conditions that trapped them into the borders of social inequality. So the ignorance of this entire analysis is their downfall, because the point is proving that the blacks deserve this fair reparation. So irrespective of proving state liability, irrespective of proving actual social benefits, they deserve something because they were oppressed by the state. That argument stands to the side of government. Before I move on to larger comparatives, let's do some housekeeping work. Number one, they told you the government is already helping the blacks through welfare. White people are poor too, so our government duty is discharged. This argument is not argued in relation to what I've already proved to you from my first speech, that legal equality, such as equal access to welfare, is not tantamount to social equality. The absence of that social equality is an inherent barrier to these individuals exercising their legal rights. So a poor white person can be educated in public school and gain a job, but a poor African American goes to a black school with high dropout rates and then proceed to suffer job discrimination. So no, guys, just because the government gives welfare to both blacks and then whites, it doesn't even prove that equality exists under your environment, and under your environment, you stand by to never address that social inequality. You cannot win this clash. Second housekeeping thing, work. The clashes were muddled because they were keen to disprove a moral link between past governances and current governances. This clash disregards the dynamism of side government, because I told you in my first speech that even if there's no moral link, you should still do it because you create social benefits. Even if there's no moral link, we should still do it because the black community deserve it. So even if you win this moral clash, we think the government still has a responsibility to implement it, but we think Rafiq gives some brilliant rebuttals that wins this clash anyways. But the second level to this, they were also confused on another clash when they argued that just some money won't fix anything. But we didn't undertake the burden of solving all discrimination. We undertook the burden of creating a better social environment that creates more opportunities for the black communities, and we stand by that even to the furthest extent that we're willing to go. We stand by creating better equality. And still, it was an insufficient rebuttal. They just told you it's unsustainable. But we told you, when you don't have property, we give you property, then you don't have to pay rent. When you don't have better education, we pay for your education. All of these things directly elevate your socio-economic standard on a permanent basis. So you can't just say this is unsustainable with no analysis whatsoever, guys. But lastly, they made a contradiction. They said from the first speaker, we cannot have the rhetoric that blacks are weak and they need help. But as their case evolved, suddenly we should all use the racial card and say that I was discriminated because I was black, and therefore entrenching the rhetoric of weakness. You're the side that creates them the inability to create that job because you strengthen the very rhetoric that created that discrimination. Only one main question that actually clashed in this debate, Mr. Speaker, because they refuse to clash on other things. Is reparations good or is reparations bad? We agree it's insufficient to just argue benefits, because you have to argue trade-off, guys. There has to be more benefits than harms, and we don't think they've ever valued you how their harms outweigh all of our benefits. And if benefits outweigh harms, we don't see why we should ban this policy. The only real harm that they gave you is that we shut people up. Here are responses that we gave to you that didn't receive an engagement. Number one, just giving them rights empowers them, not alienates them. Just like anti-discrimination laws don't shut people up, it gives you a better ability to talk and flaunt and fight for your rights. But secondly, your alternative to shutting people up is they continue to feel aggrieved. That's far worse versus the alternative that came in Shafiq, which is that they have closure. They don't suddenly lose memory of what happened to them, but it closes old wounds, Mr. Speaker, and an acknowledgement by the state that you were harmed, you were wrong. On your side of the house, you perpetually use the black card to further entrench that discrimination. You deny people jobs. We give them the kind of recognition that says that your social equality should be recognized in an overt measure. All of their intangible harms is offset by actual financial advancement, fulfillment of a moral responsibility that the state already acknowledges, and also money as an advancement of the value that these people deserve social equality. We are very proud to propose.
Thanks for the debate. Maybe some audience go back to the meeting room.